The Epistle of Barnabas is a Greek epistle containing 21 chapters, preserved complete in the 4th century Codex Sinaiticus, where it appears at the end of the New Testament. It is traditionally ascribed to Barnabas, who is mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles, although some ascribe it to another apostolic father of the same name, Barnabas of Alexandria, or simply attribute it to an unknown early Christian teacher. A form of the epistle 850 lines long is noted in the Latin list of canonical works in the 6th century Codex Claromontanus. It is distinct from the Gospel of Barnabas manuscript tradition. The most complete text is in the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Hieronymus, which are usually in agreement on variant readings. A truncated form of the text in which Polycarp's letter to the Philippians 1.1-9.2 continues with Barnabas 5.7 and following, without any indication of the transition, survives in 9 Greek manuscripts and often agrees with the Old Latin translation against S and H. Until 1843, 8 manuscripts, all derived from a common source, were known in Western European libraries. None of them contained chapters 1 to chapter 5.7a. The 4th century Codex Sinaiticus, in which the Epistle and the Shepherd of Hermas follow the canonical books of the New Testament, contains a more complete manuscript of the text, which is independent of the preceding group of texts. The 11th century Codex Hieronymus, which includes the Didache, is another witness to the full text. This Greek manuscript was discovered by Philotheos Bryennios at Constantinople in 1873, and Adolf Hilgenfeld used it for his edition in 1877. There is also an Old Latin version of the first 17 chapters which dates, perhaps, to no later than the end of the 4th century and is preserved in a single 9th century manuscript. This is a fairly literal rendering in general, often agreeing with the Family G manuscripts. There are also brief citations from the epistle in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, and a few fragments of the two ways material in Syriac and elsewhere. Early citations. Towards the end of the 2nd century, Clement of Alexandria cites the epistle. It is also appealed to by Origen of Alexandria. Eusebius, the first major church historian, however, recorded objection to it, and ultimately the epistle disappeared from the appendix to the New Testament, or rather the appendix disappeared with the epistle. In the West, the epistle never enjoyed canonical authority. In the East, the Stichometry of Nicephorus, the list appended by the 9th century Patriarch of Jerusalem to his chronography, lists the Epistle of Barnabas in a secondary list of books that are anti-legomena, disputed, along with the Book of Revelation, the Revelation of Peter and the Gospel of the Hebrews. Origen, the first editor of the epistle, Hugo Menardus, advocated the genuineness of its ascription to Barnabas. But the opinion today is that Barnabas was not the author. It was probably written between the years 70 to 131 and addressed to Christian Gentiles. In 16.3-4, the epistle reads, "Furthermore he says again, Behold, those who tore down this temple will themselves build it. It is happening. For because of their fighting it was torn down by the enemies. And now the very servants of the enemies will themselves rebuild it." This passage clearly places Barnabas after the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70, but it also places Barnabas before the Bar Kokhba revolt of AD 132, after which there could have been no hope that the Romans would help to rebuild the temple. The document must come from the period between the two revolts. The place of origin remains an open question, although the Greek-speaking Eastern Mediterranean appears most probable. John Dominic Crossan quotes Coester as stating that New Testament writings are used, neither explicitly nor tacitly, in the Epistle of Barnabas, and that this would argue for an early date, perhaps even before the end of 100 CE. Crossan continues, Richardson and Schuster have also argued for a 1st century date. Among several arguments they point to the detail of a little king, who shall subdue 3 of the kings under 1, and a little crescent horn, and that it subdued under 1 3 of the great horns. In Barnabas 4-4-5, they propose a composition date during or immediately after the reign of Nerva, viewed as bringing to an end the glorious Flavian dynasty of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, when a powerful, distinguished, and successful dynasty was brought low, humiliated by an assassin's knife. J. Curry states on the dating of Barnabas: since Barnabas 16-3 refers to the destruction of the temple, Barnabas must be written after 70 CE. It must be written before its first undisputable use in Clement of Alexandria, California, 190. Since 16-4 expects the temple to be rebuilt, it was most likely written before Hadrian built a Roman temple on the site, California, 135. Attempts to use 4-4-5 and 16-1-5 to specify the time of origin more exactly have not won wide agreement. It is important to remember that traditions of varying ages have been incorporated into this work. Treat comments on the provenance of the Epistle of Barnabas. Barnabas does not give enough indications to permit confident identification of either the teacher's location or the location to which he writes. His thought, hermeneutical methods, and style have many parallels throughout the known Jewish and Christian worlds. Most scholars have located the work's origin in the area of Alexandria, on the grounds that it has many affinities with Alexandrian Jewish and Christian thought and because its first witnesses are Alexandrian. Recently, Prigent, Wengst, and scholars of Barcelona have suggested other origins based on affinities in Palestine, Syria, and Asia Minor. The place of origin must remain an open question, although the GK-speaking Mediterranean appears most probable. Concerning the relationship between Barnabas and the New Testament, Treat writes: although Barnabas 4:14 appears to quote Matt 22:14, it must remain an open question whether the Barnabas circle new written Gospels. Based on Coester's analysis, it appears more likely that Barnabas stood in the living oral tradition used by the written Gospels. For example, the reference to gall and vinegar in Barnabas 7-3-5 seems to preserve an early stage of tradition that influenced the formation of the Passion narratives in the Gospel of Peter and the Synoptic Gospels. Contents. Although the work is not Gnostic in a theological sense, the author, who considers himself to be a teacher to the unidentified audience to which he writes, intends to impart to his readers the perfect gnosis, that they may perceive that the Christians are the only true covenant people, and that the Jewish people are no longer in covenant with God. His polemics are, above all, directed against Judaizing Christians. In no other writing of that early time is the separation of the Gentile Christians from observant Jews so clearly insisted upon. The covenant promises, he maintains, belong only to the Christians, and circumcision, and the entire Jewish sacrificial and ceremonial system have been abolished in favor of the new law of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to the author's conception, Jewish scriptures, rightly understood, serve as a foretelling of Christ, and its laws often contain allegorical meanings. He is a thorough opponent to Jewish legalism, but by no means an antinomist. At some points the epistle seems quite Pauline, as with its concept of atonement. The epistle explains many Torah laws as having a spiritual lesson as their main purpose. For example, the prohibition against eating pork is intended to forbid the people to live like swine, who supposedly grunt when hungry but are silent when full. Likewise, the people are not to pray to God when they are in need but ignore him when they are satisfied. Similarly, the prohibition against eating rabbit means that the people are not to behave in a promiscuous manner, and the prohibition against eating weasel is also to be interpreted as a prohibition of oral sex, based on the mistaken belief that weasels copulate via the mouth. It is likely that, due to the resurgence of Judaism in the early 2nd century, and the tolerance of the Emperor Hadrian, Christians, such as the text's author felt a need to resist Jewish influences polemically. In this case, the author seems to aim to demonstrate that Jewish understanding of the Mosaic legislation is completely incorrect and can now be considered superseded, since in the author's view the Jewish scriptures foreshadowed Jesus and Christianity when rightly understood. The author quotes liberally from the Old Testament, including the apocryphal books. He quotes from the New Testament Gospels twice, and is in general agreement with the New Testament presentation of salvation history. He quotes material resembling 4 Esdras and 1 Enoch, which did not become part of the biblical canon except in some traditions. The closing two ways section, see also Didache, which contains a series of moral injunctions, presents another Gnosticism teaching in relation to the body of the epistle, and its connection to the latter has given rise to much discussion.